Welcome back to my channel. If you get scared even a little bit, then this video might not be for you. Watch at your own risk, because today's story is dark, mysterious, and truly terrifying. Hello friends, how are you all? I hope you all doing great, and life is treating you well. I'm guessing you've already listened to my last horror story, but if you haven't, don't worry. I'll leave the link right below the description box. Today's story is going to be incredibly terrifying. If you have earpods, headphone, or earphones, put them on right now. Go into a separate room, turn off the light, set your phone aside, and just lose yourself in the story through your headphones. Today's story is called The Midnight Bus, Ticket to Nowhere. The rain had turned the mountain highway into a slick, black ribbon winding through the dark valley. The heavy clock on my phone screen read 12:15 a.m. as I pulled my jacket tighter against the bitter night cold. I was standing under a rusting metal awning at a desolate roadside bus stop, surrounded by dense trees that swayed violently in the freezing wind. I had been waiting for over an hour, completely alone, with no cars passing by and no sign of life anywhere around me. My phone battery was down to 4%, and the cold was slowly numbing my fingers and toes. Just as I was about to give up and start walking along the shoulder of the dark road, two dim yellow headlights cut through the thick haze. A large, ancient passenger bus lumbered down the highway, its engine making a heavy, metallic rattle that vibrated through the asphalt under my boots. The paint on the vehicle was faded and peeling in long strips, and the windows were heavily coated in gray grime and condensation, making it impossible to see inside. The bus ground to a sharp stop in front of me, its brakes letting out a deafening screech. The narrow folding doors creaked open with a loud burst of air pressure, releasing a wave of warm, stale air from inside. I stepped onto the rubber stairs, desperate to get out of the freezing wind. As soon as I crossed the threshold, a stomach-churning smell hit me. It was a suffocating blend of damp, rotting cloth, burnt rubber, and a sharp, sickly sweet metallic odor that made my throat tighten. The interior was lit by a few dim overhead tubes that flickered rhythmically, casting deep, jittery shadows along the central aisle. I turned to pay the fare, reaching into my pocket and pulling out some cash. "How much to the city terminal?" I asked, holding out a crumpled bill. The driver didn't answer. He didn't move his head, turn his shoulders, or even acknowledge that I was standing next to him. He simply reached down with a stiff, unnatural movement and pulled a heavy iron lever. The doors slammed, shut behind me with a loud thud that echoed through the frame of the bus, locking into place. The engine revved with a hollow, low roar, and the vehicle lurched forward into the pitch-black night. Shrugging off his silence as the grumpiness of a tired late-night worker, I turned and started walking down the center aisle to find a seat. There were about 6 other passengers scattered throughout the bus. Near the front sat an elderly woman wrapped in a thick wool shawl. A few rows back, a young man sat leaning his forehead against the side window, while a young couple sat together in a double seat near the middle. Farther back, a tall figure sat alone, completely silent. What caught my attention almost immediately was the unnatural silence in the cabin. The passengers weren't speaking to each other. Nobody was looking at a phone, adjusting their clothing, or shifting in their seats as the bus bounced over uneven patches of asphalt. They were sitting completely motionless, rigid as statues, staring straight ahead into the dim, shadowy space of the aisle. I picked a seat near the middle, sliding into the worn vinyl chair and resting my bag on my lap. The tires hummed against the road, and the old metal frame groaned with every curve. But the deeper we drove into the dark, the more uncomfortable I felt. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, icy and strangely still, as if the oxygen itself was stale and dead. I leaned forward slightly, trying to initiate a conversation just to break the suffocating tension. "Excuse me," I said, speaking toward the couple sitting across from me. "Do you know if we'll be making any stops before the main station?" Neither of them moved. Neither of them turned their heads. "Hey," I said, louder this time, feeling a sudden pulse of nervous anxiety in my chest. I reached my hand across the narrow gap and gently tapped the young man on his shoulder. The moment my fingers made contact with his jacket, a chill ran straight down my spine. His shoulder was as hard as a block of ice, with no give or flexibility in the muscle underneath. The light pressure of my hand caused his rigid torso to tilt backward slowly. His head fell back against the headrest with a dull thump. I choked back a scream, staggering back into my seat. The man's face was a pale, sickly gray, skin stretched tightly over his skull. His eyes were wide open, completely clouded over with a milky white film, staring blankly up at the ceiling. His jaw hung open at a broken, unnatural angle, revealing a dark, empty mouth locked in a frozen, silent shriek of terror. Heart pounding furiously against my ribs, I scrambled out of my seat and looked frantically at the other passengers. The elderly woman, the young man by the window, the lone figure in the back, every single one of them had their heads tilted backward at the exact same rigid angle. All of them had the same milky, lifeless eyes staring straight up. All of them had their jaws hanging loose in the same horrifying expression. They weren't resting. They were corpses, frozen in place like museum displays. Terror slammed into me like a physical blow. "Stop the bus," I yelled, my voice cracking in panic as I sprinted down the aisle toward the front cabin. "Hey, stop the car. Pull over right now." I reached the driver's side and grabbed his heavy shoulder, yanking him backward with all the strength I had left. The driver's frayed cap fell off his head, tumbling down onto the floorboards near the pedals. There was no face beneath the cap. Where his features should have been, there was only a flat, smooth sheet of pale, scarred flesh with no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. His gloved hands weren't even steering. The vehicle, they were bound tightly to the metal steering column with thick strands of rusted wire. The bus was moving on its own, speeding blindly down the pitch-black highway at dangerous speeds. I lunged for the door control, grabbing the emergency release lever and pulling it down with all my weight. Metal grinding against metal shrieked through the cabin, but the doors remained completely sealed. I picked up a metal emergency hammer mounted near the front step and smashed it against the glass of the door. The heavy glass didn't shatter. It didn't even crack. It hit with a dull, solid thud, like hitting a sheet of thick armor plating. Suddenly, the engine cut out completely. The loud, rattling mechanical roar vanished into absolute silence. Yet the bus continued to glide at high speed through the darkness. A second later, the flickering overhead lights burst one by one with sharp metallic pops, plunging the interior into complete pitch-black darkness. The vehicle drifted silently through the night. I backed up against the front dashboard, my chest heaving, listening intently over the sound of my own frantic breathing. My hands trembled violently as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, using the faint, blue glow of the display to illuminate the darkness ahead. I pointed the narrow beam of light down the center aisle. The corpses were no longer staring at the ceiling. Every single dead body in the bus had turned their torsos around in their seats. Their pale gray faces were now turned directly toward me, their milky, wide eyes illuminated by the cold light of my screen. Slowly, with agonizing stiffness, their pale arms began to rise into the air, reaching their rigid fingers straight toward the front of the bus. A massive weight landed heavily on the roof directly above my head. The metal ceiling bent inward with a loud groan under the sudden pressure. Slowly, a harsh, metallic dragging noise began to move along the roof from the front toward the rear. It sounded like giant, bone-like claws scraping against the thin sheet metal of the exterior. Whatever was on top of the bus was slowly crawling toward the back, dragging something heavy along with it. Then, from the dark rear section of the aisle, a low, wet, rasping sound filled the cabin. It sounded like something breathing heavily through a throat clogged with thick liquid. From a broken air vent in the ceiling near the back, two unnaturally long, dark limbs lowered themselves into the aisle. The arms were thin, covered in wet skin, with jointed elbows bent at impossible backwards angles. The creature slowly lowered its elongated, emaciated body down from the ceiling, hanging upside down like a massive spider. Its face was completely smooth and hairless, except for a wide, horizontal tear across the center that slowly peeled open to reveal rows of long, needle-thin teeth dripping with thick black liquid. The creature's neck twisted around with a sickening crunch until its blank, eyeless head was oriented directly toward the light of my phone. It opened its jagged maw wider and wider until its jaw split almost down to its chest, letting out a low, vibrating hum that shook the glass windows. At that exact moment, the bus lurched violently as the tires lost all traction on the slick road. Through the front windshield, I saw the asphalt disappear entirely. The road ended at the edge of a massive, dark cliff face overlooking a bottomless ravine. The heavy vehicle plunged forward off the edge, tipping into the dark, silent void. The last thing I felt before the stomach-dropping fall took over was a pair of ice-cold, wet fingers wrapping tightly around my ankles, pulling me backward into the shadows of the aisle. For a few seconds, everything disappeared. There was no sound, no road, no bus, just darkness. Then suddenly, I felt freezing rain hitting my face. I opened my eyes and found myself lying on the muddy ground beside the mountain road. The bus was nowhere to be seen. I tried to stand, but my legs were shaking badly. My phone was lying a few feet away, its screen cracked but still glowing. I looked toward the cliff. There was no wreckage below, no broken bus, no bodies, nothing. I somehow realized that the bus had disappeared before it could reach the bottom. The last thing I remembered was those cold fingers pulling me backward. They had dragged me toward the rear of the bus just before it went over the edge, and somehow that movement had thrown me through a broken emergency window. I had landed on a narrow patch of muddy ground beneath the road, which had saved my life. I don't know how long I stayed there before a rescue vehicle finally found me. When I told them about the bus, they looked at me strangely. According to them, that road had been closed for years. And there was something even worse. They said an old passenger bus had gone over that same cliff decades ago. Everyone on board had died. The driver, the passengers, all of them. But the bus was never recovered. To this day, I still don't know what I saw that night. But sometimes, when the rain gets heavy and the clock reaches 12:15 a.m., I hear an old engine rattling somewhere far away. And every time I hear it, I stay as far away from the road as I can. And that is where today's story ends, my friends. I really hope you all survived this nightmare. If this story scared you and you liked it, please go ahead and hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll see you in the next horror video. Until then, goodbye.